Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks to Anthony and to SALT and to the Bellagio for letting us come out and talk to you today. These are really bright. Are they bright to you? I guess now you're used to it. Before I introduce our guests, I thought I would just say a couple words about impact investing, social impact investing. This whole notion of ESG, environmental, sustainable governance, or socially responsible investing, SRI as it's called. There's no real exact definition as to what all this is, but essentially it's designed to have investments that will generate a profit while also fulfilling a social purpose, right? If you're generating a profit and there's no social purpose around it, that's just traditional investing. And if you're generating or fulfilling a social purpose and there's no profit motive around it, that's just philanthropy, or not just philanthropy, but that's philanthropy. And so this idea here is to make investments that are actually going to satisfy both, right? And there are a lot of different social impact investments that are out there. Some of them are renewable energy. Let's see, can I make the slide go? There we go. So you can see a couple of them here. Renewable energy, electric batteries, Tesla, Prius, green buildings, solar, nanotechnology, ethanol, biomass. All these things fall into this category of social impact investing or socially responsible investing. And a lot of things fall under that umbrella, right? This was actually in my Barnes & Noble the other day. It's a real book, Socially Responsible Investing. You can actually get a dummies book about it. I don't recommend it because I don't think it's a good investment acumen. But there's a lot of information that's out there. And the point of all this is to say that finding investments in socially responsible or impact places is actually pretty easy. There are tons of places to put money, and there are tons of projects being done, there's tons of funds being raised, there are a lot of ways that you can put money to work. I think the challenge is finding investments that are going to return market-like returns with market-like risk that are comparable to non-impact investments that you would do, but not for the social impact is actually really, really hard. And for allocators, which is what I do, allocating to different managers, in many cases, I'm not allowed to take into account a social impact. I'm looking for returns, and particularly risk-adjusted returns. So that's actually really, really difficult to do. But there are some that are out there, and I think these guys represent one of the funds out there that satisfies kind of the right side of that slide. So let me introduce our guests. The bald guy 2 over is Bobby Turner. Bobby is the founder and CEO of Turner Impact Capital. Turner Impact Capital is a property-related or property-focused impact investing business based in Los Angeles. Prior to Turner Impact, prior to him founding that, he was the co-founding partner, chairman, and CEO of Canyon Capital Realty Advisors, which was a $12 billion property and mortgage investment business that is part of the larger and very successful Canyon Capital, also based in Los Angeles. At Canyon, Bobby was responsible for starting a few different impact investment platforms, the Canyon Agassi Charter School Facilities Fund, the Canyon Multi-Impact Fund, Multifamily Impact Fund, the Canyon Johnson Urban Fund Series, which was a series of funds that was done in conjunction with Magic Johnson, the Canyon Catalyst Fund as well. All of these are SRI, or socially responsible investment impact platforms that Canyon developed under Bobby's leadership with the purpose of delivering both profits and fulfilling a societal purpose for its investors. In addition to his day job, Bobby is involved in a number of charities and volunteer efforts. He's on a number of boards, including the Virginia Avenue Project, the Pacific Charter School Development Corporation, and the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City. He and his wife, Lauren, have endowed a curriculum development fund and speaker program at the Wharton School, where he's an alum, which focuses on social impact studies. So, Bobby, thank you for being here. Our next guest, which is the bald gentleman next to me here, look, if you're a tennis player, as I am, or as I try to be, being up on stage with one of the world's best tennis players in history is truly a real honor. I think, as it turned out, Steffi Graf was not available today. She had something going on with the kids. But she did say we could speak to her husband, Mr. Graf, who is sitting next to me. And according to Google, which I looked up earlier, I guess you played tennis also, is that right? In the 80s or something? You did, right?
Best in the world and second in my own home.
Andre did a little more than play tennis, as you all know. He was one of the greatest players of his time. Arguably, he's one of the greatest players of all time. Andre played 1,144 matches since going pro at the age of 16. That includes 870 wins, which makes him one of 6 people in history to win 800 or more professional matches. Of those matches, one of them is actually my favorite. It's actually one of the best matches in history. You can see it here. Hopefully it comes up on the stage. For those of you who may or may not remember this, I'm sure you do, this is the 2006 U.S. Open Round 2 against Marcos Bagdatis. It was a grueling 43-game, as you can see by the score, 5-set match. This was an epic contest that started Thursday night, went deep into Friday morning. Andre ultimately won the match right here, I think, which took him to the next round. This was one that, again, if you were here or happened to see it on TV, not only did he give the fans a win, but he wound up giving the fans exactly what they wanted, which was an absolutely epic contest against an incredible opponent at a time that everyone knew this was going to be his last U.S. Open appearance. Absolutely great match among many others that were out there. Andre's career is well documented. I won't go into it in detail. It's too long to go through, but I'll mention a couple of highlights. 8-time Grand Slam national champion, 1996 Olympic gold medalist, #1 in the world in 1995, 1999, and 2003. He spent 101 weeks as #1 in the world. That's better than all but 8 other individuals in the history of professional tennis. He retired at the U.S. Open, that U.S. Open in 2006. We won't show that video because it's very sad and sappy, and I don't want to bring everybody down. But it was a historic send-off. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you YouTube it and see it. It was a fantastic way to send off an absolutely class act athlete into retirement. Since retiring, Andre's focused on philanthropy, his foundation, and in particular, his passion for education. In 2001, Andre started and built something called the Andre Agassi College Preparatory Academy, which is just down here the road, or down the road here in Las Vegas. It was built by him in 2001. It is a tuition-free charter school for kids from kindergarten to 12th grade, for lower-income kids here in the Las Vegas area. It's been the subject of numerous awards. It was dubbed a National Model Charter School by the Department of Education in 2003. In 2009, it received the designation of high achievement for all 3 schools, elementary, middle, and high school. Its first graduating class was in 2009, where 90% graduated?
First 3 years, 100% until we double enrolled, but we average about 90%.
And of those kids, I think roughly 70% went on to college. So it's hard to go back in history and think about what wouldn't have happened, but I think without that school, a number of those kids wouldn't have been in school at all. The ones that did probably wouldn't have graduated, and of those kids, almost none of them would have gone off to college. So that's a pretty amazing achievement and a fantastic legacy for a guy that actually stopped going to school after 9th grade. So Andre, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you.
So Andre and Bobby got together to form this business called the Turner Agassi Charter School Facilities Fund. We'll get into the details here in a minute, but I thought I would show a short video that we put together highlighting one of the investments in the fund, and then we can talk about it afterward. Can we roll that tape somehow?
One of the greatest tennis players ever to dominate the court is in the Bronx today for a different mission. Andre Agassi cut the ribbon at the new building for the Metropolitan Lighthouse Charter School today.
We open and operate charter schools in underserved communities across the country, and our goal is to make sure that all of our scholars are ready for college by the time they graduate high school.
Metropolitan Lighthouse Charter School is not just a school to me, it's a family, it's a village.
Lighthouse is courageous because they come into some of the toughest neighborhoods with the kids that are most at risk of really dropping out of school at an early age, and they roll their sleeves up and they change their lives.
The university has grown so much. We want to get these kids into this school building and get them a sense of understanding and a nice home for the whole community.
This is the largest private investment in this community in probably 25 years. And without the Turner Agassi Charter Facility Fund, this would not be here.
Now ask any parent what the biggest challenge they have as a parent. It's finding a great school for their kids, and you found one. But ask any great school operator, their biggest challenge is not finding great kids, it's not finding great teachers, it's finding great facilities.
The Metropolitan Lighthouse Charter School should serve as a point of pride for the neighborhood and a building block for the Bronx borough.
The collaborations and efforts that made this building possible are the kind of collaborative efforts we are working to grow in the Bronx. They represent a partnership on behalf of our communities and the future of our borough.
But this just isn't any building. This is the last piece of a puzzle that will transform these scholars into future leaders.
Going to college is It's great. Graduating college is great. If you want to see something really amazing is when you watch these kids come back to their community and make a difference in the next generation. And when you change a child's life, I swear to you, you change the future.
The Turner Agassi Charter School Facilities Fund hopes to develop up to 75 charter school buildings by fall of next year. What a great goal.
Ready? Here we go.
If I had to sum it up all into one word, it would be wow. Wow to all the times the teacher helped me. Wow to how happy the school makes me and other scholars. And on top of all that, look at the wonderful facility we have to do this in. We finally have a home.
Guys, thanks again for being here. So Andre, let me start with you. How did you make the transition, or what drove your interest in education going all the way back and starting with the Preparatory Academy?
Right. Well, first of all, welcome to my hometown. Welcome to Vegas. I hope you've had a great stay. The little secret here that might help you moving forward is people don't know this when they come to Vegas, but they actually have not a wake-up call, but a go-to-bed call. So you can actually call the operator and say, just call me and tell me, stop it, time to go to bed. It really helps.
Did you adhere to that last night, or are we?
It's been a long journey. I tell you, one that leaves me incredibly proud today, especially sitting next to my dear friend at this stage over the last 5 years, my business partner, Bobby Turner, because my focus on education really wasn't about me knowing much about it. I was, as you mentioned, a ninth grade dropout, but I started helping children a long time ago, a lot of different ways. You know, early on in my career, being successful at an early age, I sort of started feeling compelled to make a difference, and I was clothing children. I was, building Boys and Girls Club after school programs. I was, shelters for abused, abandoned kids here, and all of it sort of, maybe from my tennis background, the one thing I recognized was this feeling of, am I being proactive or reactive? And I constantly felt this frustration of being reactive to these problems, sticking Band-Aids on real issues. And I saw a show on 60 Minutes one day with Michael Feinberg, KIPP program, Knowledge is Power program, and I saw how he was really making real systemic change in these children's lives by educating them. And that's when I agreed I had to give them the tools. I had to give them the one thing I never had. I happen to be good at a sport. What about these children? They don't happen to be one of the best athletes in their sport. They end up in the places as a society we don't want. So I set about that Herculean task of really building my own K through 12 public charter school. And I'm what you would call a mom and pop shop, which is not ideal in the charter school space because many people know how to do it really well. I didn't. I had to learn from many of my failures, and I was able to outraise a lot of my mistakes. I've raised about $175 million of philanthropic dollars over the last 15, 17 years. And what I have to speak for it is a school that has 1,300 kids, that lives in perpetuity, that's educating certainly at a much better than its district peers. But it was a very unnecessary endeavor from an infrastructure standpoint. I spent $40 million on this campus to build it, and let me assure you, Ambien is no match for a $40 million mortgage, right? And so I had to learn a lot of things, but nothing was more difficult than recognizing these 1,300 kids that I was helping, yet these 3,000 kids that are on the waiting list. So in the world that I come from, that basically means I'm twice the failure as I am a success. So I spent the last number of years, long before even Bobby walked into my life, and I found myself trying to figure out ways to scale it, because it was not just frustrating, it was I just didn't want to live thinking that these are the only kids that are going to benefit from what it is that was actually happening. We're the 5th largest school district in America here in Clark County. People don't realize it. And we're also 50th in the country for kids we put into college. You mentioned the stats of the kids that have graduated from my academy. If you start comparing that to district peers, there is a single-digit percentage chance that any child will go through our public educational system here in Clark County and actually graduate college in 6 years or under. So it is really a testament to what you can do if you can, get your sleeves rolled up in these children's lives. But I hit roadblocks in that scaling because there was no real way to scale it. Philanthropy wasn't going to scale it. I was tired of promising my children. I only have 2 of them, and I think I've promised them away 5 different times. I mean, that wasn't realistic. It wasn't realistic to go down the political road where you start changing maybe some laws and governance that might trickle into our public education system. Ran into a lot of roadblocks there, and it wasn't until this guy called me to tell me he has an out-of-the-box, innovative way to scale what my mission has been for the last 15 years, and to do it in a way that's not just scalable, but also sustainable. And it's not done through philanthropy, because philanthropy runs out when philanthropists run out of money. It's not waiting for the government to solve our problems. It's going to what we still do best in this country, which is innovate, create, and make that change. And from the day he called me, I've been on this journey because it's really the only way to take a bite out of a problem that is very comprehensive in nature, but this is absolutely an important component to it.
So you mentioned this phone call. Bobby, when you made this call, I guess why? Why did you make the call? This is 23 years for you, I think at the time, roughly, of a very long and successful career in, I would call, traditional investing, and particularly in the real estate space. So why make that call, and how did this out-of-the-box idea come up?
So the call was made because I needed Andre. For the vast majority of my career, I was both a capitalist and a philanthropist. And I realized at some point that I was struggling at both. As a capitalist, I was struggling to make meaning of my change. I had gotten wealthy, working for one of the larger hedge funds in the world, and I came to realize that the only thing that wealth guaranteed me was a more comfortable form of misery. As a philanthropist, I struggled at making meaningful change. I was giving my time, I was giving my money, but I got frustrated over and over again that my conclusion is that if you wanted to treat a problem in society, then philanthropy and the government are fine. The realities are, and history has proven to us, that neither philanthropy nor government actually create sustainable or fixes for the problems. They treat them. They're not scalable, they're not held accountable, they're not efficient, they're not effective, and oftentimes, if you look at areas like education or affordable housing, they're grossly negligent. So I did, about 15 years ago in my career, what I think my wife and most women assume men can't do, is I evolved. And I evolved from an investor whose only sole metric of success was financial to one that also incorporated a metric of impact on society. Now, part of the challenge is the misperception that when you superimpose a societal metric on making money, you're going to sacrifice yield. The reality is it's further from the truth. In fact, social impact investing is really value investing. What we do is we scour the market looking for opportunities that are overlooked, misperceived, difficult to underwrite, with a huge mismatch in supply and demand, things like great school seats, and where the traditional investor has been the government and/or philanthropy. But 2 words will clearly define social impact, and that's arrogance and distrust. Arrogance from the sense of a capital provider, because we think we know what a community wants. We're not of the community, from the community, nor are we stakeholders. Distrust from the community, who assumes we're only there just to make money. So the perfect match for social impact is representing both sides of the equation, both capitalism and philanthropy. And having read Andre's book, I made what Andre calls a cold call. I thought it was a warm call out to Andre, and said that if he wanted to continue treating the problems of education, then he should continue working on his charter school fund. If he wanted to really create sustainable, scalable solutions, he should join me on a journey that would change the trajectory of tens and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of children's lives.
So you've been dealing with institutional investors your whole career, and you know what they're like, and you know what I'm like. When we look at investments, we're looking, like I said earlier, about market risk, market level returns and market level risk and so forth. So I've got to ask, as you started to go down this road, knowing it's hard enough to raise money in traditional investing anyway, and now you're going to overlay something on top of it, there's this notion that you take a discount when you're doing social impact investing. So clearly you don't think so, but can you walk through why that's still a compelling case?
Well, so I'll always refute the fact that you take a discount. I'll make a couple observations that social impact investing will typically underperform in a bull market and wildly outperform in a bear market, primarily because we are non-correlated to the broader market indices. Today, there's 1.2 million children on a wait list for a great charter school. At $20,000 a school seat, that's about a $20 billion infrastructure opportunity. Regardless of where the Dow Jones Industrial Average goes, regardless of where inflation goes, unemployment, regardless of where Facebook trades, regardless of what you tweet on the Perella Weinberg Twitter site. Parents will want great school seats for their children. So our job is to create and generate superior risk-adjusted returns. for our investors. And listen, let's be serious. Over the last 3.5 years, Andre and I have built 40 schools for 17,500 kids. With our first fund, we'll finish up by building an additional 20 schools for another 15,000 school seats. So 60 schools, 33,000 school seats. And by the way, the fund is on target to generate 11% returns net of fees, 1.5 equity multiples. Doing good, doing well, non-correlated returns. Now, can other opportunistic funds do better? No. Of course they can if they're lucky. A bull market is forgiving. A bull market is where leverage is a competency. That's not how we're playing the game. We are addressing some daunting challenges in society, but daunting challenges create generational opportunities to make great investments, but you have to have the humility to recognize that it has to be a partnership between the stakeholders and capital.
So how do you balance profits and purpose for investors? There's got to be situations where you're going through your investment plan and you're making investments, and you may have to make a trade-off for one to the other. It's never going to be equal. So how do you do that?
We don't think there's a trade-off. We think it's the purpose that drives the risk-adjusted profits. First and foremost, we tell all of our investors and we tell all of our stakeholders, every charter school operator that we build a school for, Andre and I tell them very authentically, first and foremost, we have got to make money. If we don't make money, if we don't generate positive financial returns for our investors, we can't scale the impact. We can't raise subsequent funds. If our first fund were doing 3 or 4%, we probably couldn't go out and raise a second fund. At 11%, it becomes very interesting for institutional investors. And I also think there's a paradigm shift that stakeholders and shareholders are requiring organizations to be more responsible, not at a sacrifice in yield, but just being more responsible to the impact that investments can have on the broader market and society.
So you mentioned having Andre was critical and you needed him. What is he? I mean, there are a lot of future former professional athletes that you could go and talk to and put their name on something, the Bono effect, right? So what is he bringing to the table that you needed to get this going?
Well, devilishly good looks. And for the record, I'm looking at our photo in the box up there. Your head is much shinier than my head.
It's my natural oils back
It's
off.
the natural oils.
And
Andre,
we're back.
Listen, many years ago, I got a phone call about 6 a.m. On a Sunday morning, and it was Andre. He called me. He said, "Bobby, I need help with math." I said, "That's great. I need help with my forehand. There's definitely a deal to be done here." What's the problem? He says, my son Jaden, who was 10 at the time, I think he was 10 about that time, he says, he's got a math test on Monday, and I cannot explain to him in what universe a -3 times a -3 can produce a +9. How's that possible? And I looked at my wife next to me, who's also a graduate of Wharton. I said, "Well, we got this. Sweetheart, what's the answer?" And she goes, "Well, tell Andre, if you do a bad thing to a bad person, that's a good thing." So I said, "Andre, if you do a bad thing to a bad person, it's a good thing." Andre says, "And your point is?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I actually don't know the answer. What you need to do is just memorize that tenet in mathematics and just take it for face value." And he said to me on the phone, he goes, "Bobby, maybe you can live your life that way, but I can't. I need to understand." And that resonates with me of just a fundamental authenticity. And when we go into the field of education, when we sit down with the stakeholders, the parents, the teachers, the educators, I'm a capitalist. Now, I can tell you all day long that I'm a capitalist and I've got a big heart and I want to do good and do well. But when you have a recovering philanthropist by your side who had and shared the same struggles that all these organizations had over their life, and he can say, "Hey, and by the way, it took me 6 months of dating with Andre to convince him to come to the enlightened side. That if he stayed on the trajectory of just being a philanthropist, he would not have the impact. So I needed Andre as not only my friend, my partner, and investor, but as an ambassador of great will, because he bridges that gap between the distrust from the stakeholders and the arrogance from the capital providers.
So same question, Andre. I mean, there are lots of guys like Bobby out there, a ton of people I'm sure that would love to.
Not all of us feel that way.
I'm getting that sense. There's a lot of people out there that would love to take your name and attach it to, what they're doing. So, with Bobby being probably the 10th or 100th call that you got, I'm sure throughout your career to try and raise money, what is compelling or what was compelling about what he was offering that made you say, this is the guy and this is the group I want to go with?
Well, first of all, I've gotten one call with viable ways to scale what it is I'm doing in my own city here of Las Vegas. I've gotten one. I'll fly across the world to sit down and meet with anybody that could tell me how to take what I'm doing in this one neighborhood community in Las Vegas and put it throughout the country. But additionally to that, it's rare to find somebody who has Bobby's skill set but still has that heart and commitment to keeping the proper tension that needs to exist in order for this to be a real long-term sustainable way to approach it. So we have to obviously appease our investors, but at the same time we have to make sure that the very clients that we're serving, that we're not just an additional burden to him. And the accountability that he brings to the table on both those fronts is unparalleled from what it is I've seen. I mean, not to mention I just kind of like hanging out with him too. But I also want to make point of something here. I don't give my name to things. I don't even know what that means to give my name to things. I give my time, I give my resources, I give my efforts, I give my commitment. I mean, this is something I'm all in. I do a handful of things that are important to me at different stages of my life, but they take all of me. This has been now 5 years. It took us a good year and a half, 2 years to raise a fund of $215 million, leverage up 16% for over $500 million to invest in the infrastructure for the best-in-class operators that know how to educate our future. Are you kidding me? That doesn't happen overnight. I mean, we hit the road together. We had to sell, and then here was the really shitty part. After we sold it to our investors, we had to actually sell to the operators why they want us, because they're looking at you with, they're going to sleep with one eye open, thinking you're just trying to parlay on our back. Now we have the momentum of the operators who are saying, yes, may we have another. We have multiple schools with the same operator, which in this particular environment is really a great definition of success, right? Because these operators are coming back to the table to expand their footprint that would take them 10 years to do otherwise. And you also got the investors that are saying, holy cow, I mean, I can't believe that you're creating this kind of sustainable return for us. So it's been a high wire act. It's been an absolute full-on commitment. But I don't just put my name to this, I assure you.
So, Bobby, walk through the strategy exactly. I mean, we're talking about charter schools. Obviously, it has to do with building charter schools. But what exactly are you doing? Can you kind of like trace a dollar through what the investment actually is?
So recognizing that Andre and I are not educators, we're facilitators. Our whole mission was to empower best-in-class charter school operators to focus on instruction rather than construction. My night job many years ago and how I came into charter school space is I actually was a very active board member of a not-for-profit in Los Angeles called the Pacific Charter School Development Corporation. Our mission was to address the biggest impediment to growth of charter schools, which wasn't the kids, there's a huge wait list. It wasn't the teachers, it wasn't the curriculum, it was the infrastructure of the schools themselves. Over about 8 years, using a little bit of my money, mostly Bill and Melinda Gates' money, Neil Broad's money, we built 38 schools for 16,000 school seats. My 8th year in the organization, I was incredibly frustrated that we had 48,000 kids waiting for that list. So we were 4 times the failure. What we are is we are a bridge to ownership for charter school operators. We enter into long-term 30-year triple net leases. We build these schools amazing state-of-the-art environmentally and learning-friendly boxes where they can focus on education. But we have a very unique business plan in the fact that we are a bridge to ownership. The only person in my career who's gotten rich from a landlord-tenant relationship has been me, the landlord. The only way to enrich and sustain charter schools is to empower them to own their real estate, pay a mortgage rather than rent, and thus they can build equity base. So our business model is very simple. We build a great school, we enter into a long-term lease with the operator, but at the end of the 4th or 5th year, when that school now has 4 or 5 years of both academic and financial track record, we help them access cheaper cost of capital. They're all 501c3s. They all qualify for municipal debt. So they're able to redirect the rent they're paying us to float a tax-exempt bond. With that tax-exempt bond, they can purchase a facility from us. They oftentimes can overfinance the acquisition, put some money in their pocket for curricular development, and now we've earned a fair return on our investment, a great return, and they now have the ability to pay a mortgage rather than rent and build equity with every monthly payment in perpetuity.
So you mentioned before, this is uncorrelated. Excuse me, this has lots of tracking error in the vernacular. This is not something that's going to be as reliant on GDP or jobs or growth or so forth. So what is it relying on? Where does this work and where does it not work?
Well, it works in states, first and foremost, that have charter school legislation. I mean, it might be surprising to many people that there still are 10 states in this country that don't have charter school laws. Now, that's because of a very strong union called the Teachers Union. What we're about is we're very pro-union. Andre and I talk about this all the time. It's just we're the children's union, and we're trying to represent the children. So our model works well in marketplaces. And by the way, that was very limiting when Andre and I went out. One of the greatest joys I've had in my life was trying to raise a private equity fund focused on education with Andre Agassi. I mean, we came across investors who looked at us with, some with disgust. A number of the unions looked at us and said, gee, every charter school job created is at the expense of a public school job. And our attitude would be that's actually not the case if you all were competitive and if you all delivered a good product. That wouldn't be the case. Imagine supporting a fire department that would only support or fight fires Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. When only 1/3 of kids in certain public school districts are proficient in math and science in 5th grade, that's pretty much a failure. So most of the unionists wouldn't invest. We met with capitalists who had that quagmire. We don't believe that combining philanthropy and capitalism makes sense, or investing in social impact comes at a sacrifice in yield. And they were difficult to educate. The most interesting one, Andre, remember, were the communists.
CIC.
We won't mention CIC.
Sorry.
By
You just did,
confidentiality, by name. But at the end of our presentation, one of the individuals from CIC looked at us and said, "This is brilliant, we'll take the entire fund." To which Andre leaned in, very reminiscent of saying, why does -3 times -3 equal +9? And said, explain to me why the government of China wants to invest in a private equity fund focused on education in America. And the individual looked at Andre and said, Mr. Agassi, your country is indebted to my country to the tune of $2 trillion. None of us at the table here today will be alive to see that debt repaid. Therefore, we, the government of China, have got to rely upon the next generation of Americans to grow your economy out of the debt you owe us, and you're failing miserably to educate them.
Ouch.
Now, that was, like, I think, humble pie. And then we came across the realists, and the realists were folks like yourself and your clients, and folks like Citibank and University of Michigan and Intel Corporation, Prudential Insurance, who really looked at this and said, first and foremost, what are the consequences as a society of not investing in a fund like this? And if the answer was it's unconscionable, then you were an investor. Or if you were someone like the University of Colorado or the University of Michigan, who truly is a for-profit organization with regards to their endowment, they looked at this and said, this is just a wonderful diversification or allocation in our portfolio. This is infrastructure, its risk-adjusted returns are excellent, and by the way, it's non-correlated. So it makes sense, and by the way, if we can do good at the same time, that's a wonderful win-win.
So that's how you get investors to invest. At the asset level, where does this work and not work? There's going to be places around the country, presumably. You mentioned 10 states that don't have charter school legislation. So is it those states that have charter school legislation? Do they have to be charter school friendly? Land prices, I assume, have to make sense like any other traditional real estate deal. So where does it make sense?
The two major working components are land prices, how expensive the land is, and also the state's per pupil allocation, right? So in the state of Nevada, we're probably $6,200 per student. We fund 48th in the country in per pupil allocation. New Jersey, if you take that, the per pupil allocation is $19,000. Cost of real estate, obviously real low. So the model really sings in certain parts of the country. But in other parts of the country, it's a balancing act to create that sort of relationship.
So what you mentioned New Jersey. New Jersey is one that works fairly well. Are there other places that you would say it works fairly well?
Yeah, so most of the major metropolitan markets now work for our fund. Any community that has an underperforming public school district that has what we like to say a density and diversity of population, at least 250,000 people within a 3-mile radius, at least 40 to 50% diverse. The vast majority of our schools are in low and moderate income communities. The vast majority of our students qualify for free and or reduced lunches, which is another issue that Andre and I are thinking about. How do we expand our mission and impact? 85% of our kids are obese in the schools that we've built. How is that possible when virtually 100% of those kids qualify for free and or reduced lunch, which means we're serving them and influencing their dietary intake? How can they be fat? Because we're serving them crap. Now, why are we serving them crap? Because crap is cheap. And to serve a nutritional, organic, or healthy meal costs more money, and the vast majority of school systems are financially duressed and can't afford it. But we as a society, if we're not forward thinking, what we're not spending today, we will spend tenfold in the future, because fat children grow up to become fat adults. Fat adults develop diabetes. Diabetics need dialysis. Last year alone, we as a society spent $58 billion on dialysis. So if we don't figure out ways to create innovative solutions to these problems, and not every problem will be solved with a sustainable solution because there's no revenue stream. But if we start addressing, as Andre and I talk about, addressing issues that may not have a revenue stream today, but they have a cost savings in tomorrow, how do we partner with society to provide capital and unleash the capital to pay for the issues today?
So charter schools is thought of as a controversial issue, largely around unions and so forth.
Only to unions. It's not controversial to any parent. It's a democracy. A parent has a choice. They can pick up their kid from an underperforming charter school, or they can pick up their kid from an underperforming public school and walk them between the two. So it's not controversial in anyone's mind other than the unions.
But the unions are going to help determine governance in states and other municipalities. So how much time do you guys have to spend in front of governors, mayors, legislatures, first selectmen, and so forth? Is that a part of the strategy to get people to embrace this more, or is that just too big a hurdle to overcome?
Very little. Why does the old man stop banging his head against the wall? Because it feels so good. When you start dealing with politics and legislation, as Andre has discovered, it's very painful, it's very distracting. We cannot solve all the problems. We do know that there are 20 to 30 markets where we'll be able to build 100 schools for 50, 60, 70,000 kids over the next 5 years in our lives in the trajectory of our second fund. We're going to focus all of our energies winning that game.
And keep in mind, we're not force-feeding this anywhere. I mean, all we're doing is finding and recognizing that the top 15% of charter school operators, the best in class, really do outperform their district peers. 85% don't, because there are a lot of people fed up with their lack of options, and they sort of get in over their head, which I did, and was able to outraise the money, to make up for those mistakes. So we follow our operator to the areas that they want to expand, and they're so good at what they do, they know exactly where they can thrive. They know where the waiting list, where the need is. Unfortunately, the need's everywhere in this country, but they know exactly what they need to do to make it right, and we follow them there, and slowly everything's working in the favor of
Eric,
choice.
This is essential. Someone said to me the other day, I was in a conversation where someone said, the biggest problem we have in society is the disparity of wealth in this country. When 1% controls 99% and 99% controls 1%, that undermines the fabric of civilization. I absolutely disagree. In the history of America, we've always had a great disparity in wealth. It was the fact that the 99% knew that with hard work, with education, with a little bit of luck, they could actually evolve from that 99% to the 1%. What we have in society is a disparity in hope. And when you take away hope from these underserved communities, and when you have intensive poverty, that's when intensive violence can occur. I'm from Baltimore, I live Baltimore. The problem there is a lack of hope in these communities, and unless we address the issues of education, healthcare, and affordable housing, when 50% of renters in America spend over 40% of their income on rent, and 25% spend over 50% of their income on rent, that comes at the expense of healthcare security, food security, and we have got to reinstill hope. Until that time, we are truly on the trajectory of a failure of society.
So this is, you could have said that 10 years ago. And you could have said that 20 years ago, and even longer beyond that. So this is not a new problem that you guys are facing.
It's not a new problem, but the problems have always been addressed by the government and philanthropy. What Andre and I are saying is that the government and philanthropy are not reliable, they're not dependable, they're not scalable, and oftentimes they're not held accountable. We are held accountable. If we don't generate risk-adjusted returns for investors, we don't get more money. No more money, no more schools. So
if we don't produce the high-quality schools from an educational standpoint, we also fail.
That's right. Parents won't take their kids to our schools. So we just recognize that if you want to truly address today's societal's daunting challenges, you have to harness market forces to address these issues, create sustainable solutions, make a profit. But there's nothing wrong with making a profit while at the same time having a positive impact on the world. They're not exclusive. In fact, they're symbiotic.
So would this strategy have been able to be launched 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Is the trend in terms of governance and sort of general thinking about charter schools and everything else moving your way, or is it more and more headwinds that you're dealing with?
10 years ago, it would have been very difficult. We've had 10 years of great experience and data with great charter schools. I think that there's a paradigm shift, again, in activism with regards to stakeholders and shareholders and investors, that, success The metric of success cannot be solely defined by financial returns. The vast majority of millennials today will support brands that they believe are having a positive impact. They'll pay more for brands that they believe have a positive impact on the world. 56% of college graduates last year said that they would go work for a firm, take a lower pay cut. They take a pay cut to go work for a firm that had a positive impact on the world. So I think that the activism now is shopping. Consumers, and just like parents, they vote with their pocketbooks, they vote with their feet. They're supporting brands that they believe are doing good and doing well. And every corporation, from a nonprofit, for-profit, has got to recognize that employing socially responsible practices and ethics will be vital to the success of any organization, period.
You're on Fund 1 today, now raising...
As are you.
As am I, that's right. Now raising Fund 2. Is this Fund 5, 6, 7, 8? Where do you see taking this?
We'll take it until the point where we have righted the wrong of public education. I don't believe that charter schools are the panacea to the problem. I believe that they're a component.
You've gotten 4 claps. I've gotten nothing.
Yeah, but think about when you played tennis. I'm making up for all the tennis claps.
There, see? There you go.
4 to 1.
You got your clap.
Again, we don't believe that charter schools are the panacea. Public education is a monopoly. And by introducing competition, what we're hoping is that the public schools will wake up and say, you know something? These guys are doing something that's working. And we know it's working because parents are taking their kids out of our schools. Therefore, we need to wake up and we need to figure out and address the issues and become effective, efficient, and we have to be now held accountable. Our job is to work ourselves out of a job. If we've worked ourselves out of a job, we truly have been successful. If they don't need charter schools, that means we've won the battle. It's not about us, it's about the kids. That'd be you, Andre, that'd be number 6 for me.
I didn't give you a chance before to talk about the Lighthouse Academy, the video we showed, so I wanted to do that now. Andre, do you want to talk a little bit about, or Bobby, either one of you, just about that project, what that was? It's obviously up and running, and how that got started, how you even got introduced to them?
I'll let you take it, Bobby.
You do it. I've been talking.
No, I want to.
Can one of you please talk soon?
Well, listen, Sonny, a building doesn't show the story. And we both get emotional about these things. A number of years ago, we had opened up a school in one of the worst neighborhoods, the Allegheny section of Philadelphia, for KIPP. It was a K-8 charter school in one of the worst neighborhoods. And after we just had the ribbon cutting, myself and Andre and Mayor Michael Nutter were standing in our little, War of Thrones, little dome of silence there, talking about how we were changing the world. And this young African-American woman sort of pushed herself into the center of us, and we thought immediately we needed to call security. What was the issue here? And she looked at us and she goes, I apologize for interrupting, but I just had to let you know that every morning I get up and every morning I cry that there's absolutely no one in this world who is in my corner rooting for my kids' success. And today, you made me a believer that there are people out there. So when we go into the schools, it's not the kids that get Andre and I excited, because it's the parents. The kids don't get it, but the parents see the opportunity, the trajectory change that we're providing for those kids. So be it Lighthouse Academy, be it KIPP, be it Rocket Ship, all these great schools are instilling hope. And that is, as I said before, is what we're lacking.
And what's really overwhelming when it comes to the kids is their feeling of entitlement. They feel like they deserve a good education. They don't feel like they're getting anything special. And that's an awesome experience, because you're looking at them going, you're right. You don't fail us. We fail you. So you see these kids who sort of blow through their day smiling, not running to the carpool line to get out of school when school ends, but hanging around and counting on one another, and you're moved to tears. And then you see the parents, and oh, forget about it. You can't get through it without realizing. I mean, I have children now, so it's just a profound perspective that brings full circle everything that I've been committed to. So it's and to do it in the Bronx was even extra special. Right? I could see where I spent most of my years as a professional tennis player, right from the rooftop.
And Eric, I'll ask one question. In what universe, according to Andre, in what universe does making an 11% return and changing the world of thousands of children not make sense? In other words, you're in a 1%, a 2% rate environment. I raised opportunistic hedge funds for years, and we talk about generating 18 to 20% returns net of fees. What kinds of risks do you have to take to get that? What kind of risk are you taking not investing in a fund to earn 11% and drive school seats?
I had a question from the audience for Andre. While you were playing, did you ever deflate your balls? Sampras mentioned it last night. He thought maybe you did. I don't know.
He's just jealous I had balls. Oh, that's sympathy. I don't need sympathy class. No.
Before we wrap up, we just have a few seconds here, and I know Rob Reiner is coming out in a minute. I don't want to keep him waiting. I think he's going to show an uncut version of When Harry Met Sally. You wrote a book, Open. I don't have a copy with me, but I'm sure a number of you have seen it. Open printed how many millions of copies?
Oh, I don't know. I risked a hell of a lot more than I gained from it. I'll tell you that.
Millions of copies. It did what is known in the printing industry as a presidential run, which simply means what it sounds like. It's a run that's typically reserved, in terms of number of printings, it's a run that's typically reserved for presidents who do their memoirs after they leave office. Unbelievably successful book, and largely because of how open and how honest you were when you're talking in the book. So going through the book, you talked a lot about, and by the way, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a great book. When you talk in the book, you talk a lot about your career in tennis. You talk about some of the decisions you made, and you talk about some of the bad decisions that you had made. And I'm just curious, when you think of bad decisions, what comes to your mind? Is it things like, I have a picture here. Was this a bad decision, or like, did you wake up that day and said, yeah, that's going to work?
You invested in that guy too. How about that?
I did. No, I didn't invest in that guy. If you Google the phrase bad hair, I'd never done this before, but if you do that, there's a lot of pictures of you out there. Some are focused on hair, some are focused on other parts. This particular picture here isn't even focused. I don't know what it is, but it's turned me off the color blue forever. The good news is, look, bad hair does not stop you from having a wonderful career. There are lots of great people that have had tremendous success with hair like you had. On behalf of Andre, my friend Bobby, Salt, and Skybridge, the Bellagio, thanks very much for letting us come on.